Hello and welcome back to the second part of our trip report for my recent cruise on board the Celebrity Millennium, where we sailed from Singapore to Mumbai in India. If you've not watched that first part yet, I'd recommend starting there, and I've linked it in the description. But for those who are rejoining, welcome back, and you will know that we left off the journey after just departing from the city-state of Singapore. In this second part, we'll focus on our stops in Malaysia and Thailand, where we started with a visit to Kuala Lumpur from Port Klang, before sailing up the coast to enjoy an overnight stay in the city of Georgetown on the Malaysian island of Penang. From there we sailed further north and enjoyed a day on the island of Phuket in Thailand. If that sounds of interest to you, I'd recommend subscribing so you keep up with all the rest of the parts of this trip report. But for now, my name is Darren and this is my look at my recent visits to Malaysia and Thailand on board the Celebrity Millennium. My first port of call was the port of Klang in Malaysia, which is often billed as Kuala Lumpur, due to the huge metropolis that is around an hour away by road, and that is where the majority of the ship headed. The entry into our berth reminded me a lot of Rotterdam for those who have been there, as the vast Klang container port is located along one bank of a channel, although in Rotterdam it is a long stretch of river, but in Klang it does open up at both ends. I was looking forward to arriving at the impressive cruise terminal in Klang, but sadly I wouldn't get to see it until later in the day, as a US aircraft carrier was docked there, which left us using an empty container ship dock. Not quite the same. With no facilities offered to us, you either had to be on an excursion or jump on a shuttle bus to the port gate. To be honest, there's very little on offer in Klang. Whilst Kuala Lumpur is of course one of the region's biggest cities, a true metropolis that is just waiting to be explored. Thankfully, we had booked a shore excursion, and it just simply took us to Kuala Lumpur and back, with time to explore on our own, which is often our favourite way of seeing somewhere. Me and my wife had already spent some time in the Malaysian capital, so we simply headed to the KLCC for much of the day, and had lunch at a food court which is at the foot of the impressive Petronas Towers. But we actually started by taking a stroll to the new Saloma Link Bridge, before heading back to the park around the towers. The bridge wasn't there the last time we visited the city, and was something that was of interest to my wife, and was well worth the short walk from the foot of the Petronas Towers to get there. After our walk around the KLCC park, we strolled back to the covered walkway that links the KLCC to the main shopping district of Bukit Bintang, and that is where our coach back to the ship would pick us up from. That area is very crowded and is literally just full of shopping centres, so not somewhere we'd spend much time. But with the Christmas decorations up in all of those shopping centres, we had a quick look around while waiting for the shuttle back to the ship. Once back at the Millennium, we enjoyed dinner on board, and then we would go up to the top deck to watch us sail away from Klang. We would go past the cruise terminal, and then we would go out into the Malacca Strait, before we would have an early night and get ready for our 2-day stay in Georgetown on the island of Penang, still in Malaysia. To start with, I should probably give a warning about Penang, as despite having good facilities at the terminal, and we actually got a dock there this time, you are not allowed to simply walk out through the main entrance. You are taken to a side exit, which is a tunnel that's full of people trying to sell you excursions and taxi rides. To be honest, the people in there were fine, and when you said no, they moved on to the next person. But waiting outside of the tunnel was a gaggle of people trying to sell you the same things. And whilst most of those were fine, the odd few were far too pushy. And for us, there was one guy in particular who followed my wife for far too long until I had to step in and get rid of him. Sadly, that's the first impression many are given about Penang, and many of those on board the ship may have left with a poor impression of the place, but thankfully Everybody else we met along the way were friendly and helpful. We had 2 full days on the island, so we broke our time into exploring Penang Hill on the outskirts of the capital, and the second day we explored Georgetown itself. To do all of that, we walked from the cruise terminal to the nearby bus station and bought a travel bus card, which gave us unlimited bus travel. From there, we jumped onto the bus to Stenson Bukit Bintang, which is where you can take a funicular up to the top of Penang Hill, a former British hill station that has now been developed into a tourist attraction with lots to enjoy. We have done a number of funiculars over the years, but this one has to be one of the most impressive we have been on, partly due to the steepness of some of the sections, but also because of the speed it runs at. There was a huge queue to not only pick up your tickets, but to board the train itself. But thankfully we had bought premium tickets, and that let us jump both of those queues, and probably saved a couple of hours of waiting time, so we would definitely recommend doing that, especially if you're visiting the hill on the cruise ship, where your time ashore is limited. When we reached the top, we took a walk around the main square where you arrive, where there is a small museum with an old train, and you get to take in the stunning views from a couple of viewing decks that are up there. After enjoying those, we set off to walk to the habitat. This is a pay extra area that is given over to nature, where you walk through the rainforest on paths, bridges, and on a raised treetop walkway. Whilst we did see plenty of birds, insects, butterflies and dragonflies, we sadly didn't see any of the monkeys or snakes that are said to be seen there often, and that we had seen on YouTube videos when researching our visit. There was a cafe at the end of the walk in the habitat, which offered a small range of food, so we grabbed some lunch there and then jumped back onto the included golf cart, which took us to the main square, where the funicular starts from. Again there was a large queue, but our premium ticket allowed us to jump to the front of it once more. At the bottom we did a bit of shopping at the gift shop, as you do, and then we jumped onto the bus once more. But this time we went around the corner to the impressive Kek Lok Si temple, which is a Buddhist temple complex set into a hillside. I have been fortunate enough to visit a number of Buddhist temples, but this is the first one I have gone to where you need to take a couple of funiculars to and from the bottom of it, which just highlights the size of the complex and the steepness of the hill it is built into. The temple and complex overall is dominated by a huge pagoda and a large statue that sits at the very top. But to be honest, whilst it is impressive when you are there, it's actually far more impressive from a distance, and as you're walking through the streets to get to the entrance to the temple itself. Also, your visit is somewhat ruined by the commercialisation of the temple, where you go from one gift shop to the next, but it is somewhere I would recommend visiting. Although if you can, I would do it on your own, as while shore excursions were offered to go there, everyone we met who were there on an organised trip were complaining that they didn't have enough time to explore all of the different levels. After walking through the streets of Ayerintam, where the temple is based, we jumped back on board the bus and headed to the centre of the Georgetown commercial district, where we were going to go to a viewing platform at the top, which is a huge skyscraper, before heading for tea at the Kimberley Street night food market. Sadly, once again those plans fell through as it started to rain heavily, but we did have a quick walk down Kimberley Street to at least see it, before jumping back on a bus, back to the cruise ship and grabbing tea there instead. With us back on board much earlier than expected, we headed into the theatre for the first time, where we saw Stephen Barry, an Irish singer who brought an operatic style to pop and rock songs. And whilst he was certainly talented, he won me over as I'm a huge fan of Jim Steinman and Meatloaf, as he did a great rendition of I'd Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That. Thankfully, the rain stayed away the next day, and we will get to explore Georgetown on foot. Starting with a walk down Beach Street to see some of the local architecture, before heading back to the seafront and to a number of jetties. Whilst now a tourist attraction in the main, complete with gift shops, these jetties are still places where locals live and work, and each has their own different history, culture and community that makes them a fascinating place to visit. The city has a thriving street art scene, and it has been turned into a walk of sorts. So we set off in search of a number of these works, and whilst we couldn't find all the ones we were heading for, we found plenty that we didn't know were there. This was a great way to see the city, and to make the most of walking around Georgetown. But we did also make sure to include a number of the main sites of the city, including the Kaplan Kelling Mosque, the Goddess of Mercy Temple, and also just the narrow streets and architecture around Armenia Street, one of the more upmarket areas. And that kind of sums up Penang. It's just one of those places where you can simply walk from the ship, stroll around these streets, and constantly come across things of interest. That continued as we walked from the town centre and back to the ship. This time we walked past the colonial-style government buildings, down the seafront promenade, and past an historic fortress. We were joined by the Anthem of the Seas in the afternoon, but with those on board that ship only having a few hours to explore the city before setting off later that same night, I was so grateful to have 2 full days there, although that still wasn't enough. So back on board we once again have tea, watch us set sail, and get ready for an incredibly early start the next day. When visiting the Thai island of Phuket, there are a couple of places that you can actually arrive at. One is in the far southeast of the island and is a commercial dock that you pull up to, whilst the second place is to simply drop anchor off of Patong Beach. It was the latter where we arrived, and it was very well organised, with local motorboats coming to meet us that could take plenty ashore on each trip, which made it much faster than using the ship's tender boats. We had plenty of time on Phuket, which worked perfectly for us, and we had a shore excursion to the incredible Phang Nga Bay in the morning, which is around 2 hours from Patong, on the Thailand mainland, but we still had plenty of time to explore Patong when we got back. If you don't know, Phang Nga Bay features a series of limestone cliffs, complete with caves that seemingly rise from nowhere, out of the sea and into the sky. It is also known to many for its appearance in James Bond's The Man with the Golden Gun, or in the 1997 Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. For our adventure we started downriver in the rainforest, where we took a longship out into the sea and around many of the islands that are in the bay, and we would go on to the Pangi village. This is a floating village that is home to a Muslim community that has called Pangi home for generations. It is connected to one of the cliffs, but the only part of it to be actually on the land itself is a mosque and a cemetery, with all of the village's houses, schools, shops, cafes and restaurants built out into the sea. It is a fascinating place to visit, but one that has also sadly been spoiled by having far too many tourist shops. From there, we jump back onto our boat, sail back to the rainforest jetty, and set off on a couple of hours journey back to Patong. Despite hitting lots of traffic this time, it was rush hour for our return journey, we would still have plenty of time to explore Patong and its famous Bangla Road. We started by heading from the coach station to the Malin Plaza Market, which is a mixture of tourist market and street food markets. So we started with a quick look at some of those tourist stalls, then we grabbed some chicken gyozas for a quick lunch before setting off to explore the resort. We walked down one of the main shopping streets, past some of the huge hotel complexes that were found there, and past a couple of shopping centres, before we arrived at the iconic Bangla Road. For those that don't know, Bangla Road is home to many huge nightclubs, bars, adult entertainment venues, and more. And whilst not somewhere me and my wife would usually head for a night out, it was interesting to walk along it in the daytime to get the true Phuket experience. The street starts at the beach, and after a quick walk onto it, we would then carry on along the front towards the tender port and go back to the ship. Phuket has lots to offer, and much of it can be simply enjoyed on foot from the tender port, so it's well worth visiting in our opinion, and whilst it certainly has a hedonistic element to it, away from Bangla Road it's great for families. With a lion awaiting us the next day, we would once again head into the theatre, to watch an English trio known as This One's For You, who did an Elton John tribute. And whilst I'm not a huge fan of Watford's #1 fan, it was an enjoyable show. So whilst you may think the next few days will be relaxing and not much happening as we spend 2 days heading across the Indian Ocean to Sri Lanka, there's quite a lot to cover. So we'll leave this part here for now. All that remains to be said is thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed our part 2 of our Singapore to Mumbai cruise, and see you next time.